Hello. This week, Joseph is out of town, but I'm joined by artist and professor Madeline Rupard to discuss rest stops. This week's episode is meant to build off of last week's episode on infrastructure aesthetics, since rest stops are almost entirely comprised of car-oriented infrastructure and corporate chains. Like a lot of guest episodes, this one is going to start out with a short interview with Madeline before we dive into the topic. How are you doing today?
Hey, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Yeah, lovely Saturday afternoon. Just went on a hike. Now I'm on this podcast. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. To start out, I think our audience might be interested in learning how we connected because it's kind of an interesting story. So how did you find our podcast?
You know, it's funny. Through the summer, work on a lot of paintings. I'm an artist. And it's easy for me to get into the zone sometimes when I just have something nice playing in the background. And I was kind of listening to some supernatural podcasts and I was getting a little tired of them. And so I was like thinking about listening to some other subjects that interest me. And one of them is the CARI initiative, the, Consumer
Aesthetics Research Institute.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Run by Evan Collins.
Yeah.
I've been really obsessed with it ever since I was shown the project. And so I think I've looked it up before on Spotify to see if anyone's made a podcast about it, and no one had. And then I looked it up a couple months ago and found your podcast, which was exciting to listen to. So,
yeah. So were you involved with CARI at any point?
I'm more of a supporter and cheerleader. I was shown it by a friend. And then I became friends with Evan Collins on Facebook. I think we just were on Facebook Messenger. Like we had a couple back and forths where I just thanked him for what he was doing because I thought it was very unique. And then we did end up meeting in New York at some point. And then he has kind of been a friend and helper with this separate Instagram mall account that my friend and I run called Luxury Department Store.
We actually had Evan on the pod. I don't know if you heard our Whimsicraft episode. Yeah, he was a really good guest. And we might actually have him on in the near future, but stay tuned for that. So that Instagram account you mentioned, Luxury Department Store, it documents malls, and I can see how it's coming out of CARI because it's documenting consumer culture. Can you talk a bit about that?
You know, it's funny. It's one of those things that started out as a joke and then it became very real. Like a lot of great things in life. I was talking to my friend Ann Hart, who you'll probably hear a little bit more about today. She works at Anthology Film Archives in New York, and we were roommates for a couple years and just really good friends from going back to undergrad years before we came out to New York for our master's. And she and I talked about our kind of mutual interest in smooth jazz and how we found it really funny because there's a lot of saxophone, and the saxophone is a very majestic but also humorous instrument. But also, we just really actually found that some of the songs even when we got past the initial humor or like cheesiness, like sometimes we actually found like some sincere appreciation for, like Pat Metheny or Kenny G or some of these covers of Sting songs that are like way more beautiful and luxurious. So we started talking about that, and then that kind of developed into aesthetic interest too, because we're both very, very visual-minded people. And we started collecting images of malls on Pinterest and Tumblr and finding these scans that people were making. And then we started posting them. And for a couple of years, it was just this dormant, just our friends followed us on the Instagram account. And then all of a sudden, maybe I think it was like about 2021, someone big discovered our accounts and started posting them. And then we got a bunch of we got like Amy Sedaris following us and Nicholas Braun from Succession and just a bunch of little kind of New York hipster celebs started following us and reposting. And then I think it was also at the wake of like Stranger Things season 3 when they had like the big mall scenery. So I think people were kind of jumping on that too. And there was this renaissance of the 80s. So it started getting a lot more steam, and it was kind of out of nowhere at a time when me and Anne were both in between projects. So we really poured a lot of energy into it, and it became really fun.
Yeah. You have some really great images on the account. I recommend people check it out. But, malls are not your primary subject matter as a painter. They're rest stops in suburbia. So can you tell our audience a bit about how and why you like to paint rest stops?
Well, for one thing, they're a lot easier to paint than a mall because skies are much more, you can make a beautiful sky pretty quickly, but to like do every little single store in a mall, it's a bit more timely. So there's a practical element there. But I love gas stations. I've always felt kind of, even as a child, like I remember one of my first formative memories was looking out a window and seeing like those kind of what we consider kind of ugly commercial signs, but it was at twilight and they looked kind of pretty to me. Even as a kid, I felt like some sort of little spark of beauty. But I mean, I kind of also find them humorous because we know that it's like, connected to like the oil industry and extraction. And not that those things are so funny, but it's funny that like sometimes things that are maybe have like an element of corruption or big money attached to them, if you divorce it from that, sometimes you can just appreciate the surface beauty that exists there, you know? Or what they mean to you in the moment, which is often like on a road trip, you're passing through America, and you're going through these highways and towns that you just wonder what the lives are like of the people that live there. And then you see just a little glowing station and it seems to be some sort of strange little haven, or like maybe even there's a little bit of danger there,
Yeah. Have you ever seen the meme about the sky at gas station parking lots?
I show it to my students often when I'm trying to describe my work.
Yeah. I've had that happen before though, where like I've exited a store while the sun is setting and it looks so beautiful because there's not much to interrupt it. You can really take in the skies and the heavens,
Totally. Yeah. And I think we also tend to be on our way home from the big event of the day, right? And that's the time when the light gets good. That's like the joke too, is that when you go to like a national park, the sky is just kind of like this ugly cornflower blue color, then you can just feel the heat of like the Grand Canyon. But when you're driving home, you hit that magic hour, everything cools down and becomes kind of vivid and fluorescent,
Yeah. And were there any other inspirations in terms of you starting to depict them, like Catherine Opie, I think you mentioned?
I love Catherine Opie's early work. Yeah. I think there's a lot of films that really make great use of the American highway. I just saw Easy Rider, which is a beautiful movie about two drug dealers going across the southern U.S. highways, and there's a really great soundtrack. But there's also just these kind of poetic imagery of like them driving through these towns and the characters they run into. But it's mostly about the drive, I think, and the way that the highway looks. And there's a really beautiful scene, like kind of pastiche montage of the highway right before the very end, which is very brutal, so I won't tell you. But
Yeah.
a little bit of a spoiler, but that's a really great one. Paris, Texas has a great, kind of West Texas highway aesthetic to it. And there's a very memorable scene of this estranged father and his son eating lunch in the middle of like a highway median while they decide what they're going to do next, right in the middle of the film. And yeah.
I think that used to be more of a thing with early highways before they started building rest stops. People would eat in highway medians, but we'll get to that with the history of rest stops in a bit. But where did you grow up? Was it a place that had a lot of highways and a lot of rest stops?
I actually moved around quite a bit, and I think that may be partially why I'm interested in these places of transition and transit. I was born in Utah. My parents are not from Utah, but they met there for school. And then I ended up moving to Maryland as a young child, and we spent a lot of years there moving around a little bit. And then we moved to Georgia. And then, honestly, the last 10 years of my life after college were spent kind of moving between the West and East, moving out. I was a student at BYU in Provo, Utah, and then I moved out to get into grad school at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, and I spent a few years there. Then I went back for a job in Utah, and then I came back to Brooklyn for the last 3 years. So I feel like, and I always just pack everything in my car and I just downsize and I just drive across the country every time because it's just like such an important part of the process for me of moving. Like, I guess I could just downsize and take a plane ticket or, actually get a mover or something. But there's something about that feels like it's a nice like marker in time, So that's a long answer.
Yeah. I've never experienced that, as I've never actually moved anywhere besides like within the city of Chicago, but it sounds nice.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're in a big metropolis, so it's kind of probably has that feeling of coming and going still, even if you've stayed here your whole life.
Yeah. And then to start out with the topic, now we can get to rest stops. So what are they? How would you define them?
Rest stops. So I guess what distinguishes a rest stop from a gas station, although they're not mutually exclusive, as we know, is that the rest stop is a little bit more designed to be a place of leisure for people that are traveling rather than, just somewhere in your neighborhood that you pass by on the way to work. It's a bit more geared and marketed towards the road tripper. And there's often commercial like food courts involved, but not always. Sometimes you just have rest stops that are just restrooms and like a bulletin board of maybe a box of pamphlets of local, entertainment.
Yeah. I think of them as the places on the sides of highways that have gas stations and fast food restaurants, and then also usually motels. There isn't much in terms of small businesses. It's all like big chains and corporations.
Yeah, definitely. And if there is a small chain, it's always very, very unique and idiosyncratic, I have found.
Yeah. A good example of a rest stop is this meme we're going to probably circle back to a few times throughout the episode. It's the European mind can't comprehend this meme, which is actually a photograph that's by, what's his name? Edward
Bertinsky.
Yes. Yeah, it circulates all the time on the internet. People repurpose it for different memes, but that is like the platonic ideal of what I'm talking about when I say rest stop. It's that image.
Yeah, totally. And it's one that I find really compelling as a marker of what it's like to drive and experience America.
Yeah. And then with rest stops, there, are very common chains that you'll see all the time for fast food: McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, Taco Bell. Me as a non-driver, I am not as familiar with gas stations. Are there any that you're particularly interested in that come up in your paintings a lot?
I think I'm never painting it for the thing that's involved at the gas station, but it's kind of like a nice, it's something, maybe it's just the color of the Subway logo against the gas station that makes it feel like it's the right painting, for me to make.
Yeah.
I think when I'm making these paintings, it's sometimes less about the literal thing that I'm painting and more about the formal elements that it presents. And so I have ended up painting Subway, or McDonald's is kind of maybe a bit more of a charged one because it does feel so somehow ubiquitous with America,
Yeah.
Anything that kind of has this kind of punctum to it, this moment where it kind of punches through and feels like something that justifies the rest of the painting around it,
Yeah.
That ends up being something I want to paint.
There is a regionalism to gas stations though. Wawa and Sheetz apparently are a fierce gas station rivalry that exists.
Yeah, no, my family lives mostly in eastern Pennsylvania these days, and Wawa and Sheetz is let me tell you, anyone you speak to in the area has a strong opinion on which one is better. I'm team Wawa, but only for convenience sake, because there's one that's near my parents' house that's nice and clean and has a good, what are those called? Coca-Cola, the machines where you can click and decide which one you want. You know what I'm talking about?
Mix the flavors.
Yeah, freestyle, Coca-Cola freestyle. So
yeah,
it has a Coca-Cola freestyle machine, and I go in there and do a little concoction. I'm a little bit of a soda addict, so I do a little bit of root beer and Coke, which is blasphemy, I'm sure, to some people, but so.
Yeah. And then we actually had a bit of a conversation about what term we should use for the topic for this episode, because originally I was thinking rest area. But then I came to find that rest area is more specific. It refers to government rest stops that are right off of interstate highways that have large restrooms and picnic facilities and some vending machines, but they don't really have private businesses because they're not allowed to. So rest areas are describing something more specific. Rest stop, I feel like it's more like an umbrella term that encompasses both the state-run rest area along with service areas. And service areas, I think, are more so what we're talking about and what I see depicted in your paintings. Those are the ones where you find a plethora of corporations, gas stations, fast food companies.
Yeah, for sure. I find it's funny how they market them differently. Some of them will be called adventure stops. That's one in Utah that's popular. Maverick calls it an adventure's first stop. Or you'll see travel area, travel stop. But I think you're right. I think rest stop is the most all-encompassing. It's the more Catholic in the true sense of the word Catholic, meaning kind of universal.
Yeah.
Version of that.
It's more informal though. I don't think it's typically put on the side of highway signs. They actually use other terms more often, but it seems like it's in vernacular language the best word to describe what these are.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
On your website, actually, you have a section underneath paintings that's called Modern Land, and that's where I find most of your paintings that depict rest stops. What does modern land mean?
So when I'm talking about modern land, what I'm kind of referencing is to land that has been modified in some way, right? Because when we think of like untouched desert wilderness, modernity is not the first word that comes to mind, but it's the second you start to see like metal and cement involved in the picture, or lights or brands or logos, where it changes totally. As a painter, I think about how everything is relative, right? And the second you start putting like fluorescence in that palette, it changes the experience of those spaces.
Yeah.
And a lot of the work that I'm making is interested in the kind of organic, chaotic, tertiary mess that is Earth against this kind of modern, controlled, segregated color, moments where you have neon that no one in the Middle Ages ever saw, naturally occurring unless it was like maybe a sunset. And so those moments are moments of wonder for me when I talk to my students, because I'm also a professor and I teach painting. I tell them that I think a lot of good paintings are made of good contradictions and good tensions between different things. Like a good novel needs a good conflict.
Yeah. No, these do feel like especially modern, but there's a deeper history to rest stops than I honestly expected. I thought the history of rest stops is going to start with interstate highways in the 50s, but the rest stops that we know today, many of them actually you can trace them back farther to proto-highways, like early highways like the Lincoln Highway and Route 66. So now I think we can kind of get into rest stops history. So Lincoln Highway, I didn't know about this before this week. I'm not like a highway aficionado, but like Route 66 I knew about. That's a lot more iconic, but ironically, like I didn't know until I was an adult that Route 66 starts in Chicago. Even though I rode along it with my family, I just think we have so much local history here that like us being the starting point or the terminus of Route 66 is not like high on our list of local history.
I didn't even know that that was part of Chicago. I kind of think of it as the southwest corner of America.
Yeah.
I've only been on it, for a few seconds, a few minutes in 2023, but it was definitely in the Arizona cars area of our nation. That's Pixar cars.
You know what actually ends in Chicago? It's the Art Institute of Chicago. That's actually the terminus.
Are you serious?
Yes.
And that's where you went to undergrad?
Yeah, I went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago.
Well, that's pretty compelling. I think is there some good highway art coming out of the SAIC?
I don't know of anyone who's done work on highways, but there's like a sign, right across the street from the Art Institute that says like Historic Route 66, and a bunch of people have tagged it. I don't know if that counts. But these early highways, they were generally routed through the center of small towns as well as cities. And so the demand or need for rest stops wasn't as high because local small businesses that already existed could often meet some of the needs of motorists. And then new types of businesses were needed, like service stations and motor courts. Those sprung up to serve them. And so the need for rest stops wasn't as present in a way because small towns could just serve them initially.
Yeah, and those are the ones that you see when you're passing through, like if you're on your way to California from Vegas, for example, you see these little towns and you just start to wonder. I always have this question in my mind, like, how do people get there? How did they decide to live their lives, to live like the big rites of passages of their lives in these little dusty desert towns,
Yeah.
But it's like we really are seeing it through this very like present lens, where before it was maybe nice to go get some cheap land in Mesquite, Nevada,
Yeah.
So
I think it's partly because people like being rooted, and so people tend to live where they grew up and don't move around too much typically. But you've been on both the Lincoln Highway and Route 66, right?
Yeah, actually, I just spent a little time on Lincoln Highway a couple of weeks ago. My boyfriend was writing an essay about Mustangs, and he's a journalist, and he was writing about how there's someone who's shooting down these Mustangs in western Utah. So we actually drove out to this area of Utah called Dugway, where there's a lot of nuclear testing, and there's this big herd of Mustangs roaming free. And we just checked out these Mustangs together, and they all have names. They're all cataloged by a group of ladies that live out there and are kind of their caretakers. But along the way, you can see these little points where the Pony Express used to go through. Mm-hmm. They have some monuments and also like a preserved old like cabin that they used to rest with the horses. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool to see and kind of feel that old West thing, and to think one thing that crossed my mind is it's interesting to think about being on these roads at a time where you can't go get like a spicy chip from a gas station. You're just trying to get all the way to California so you can finally maybe actually have a meal. The desert's a wild place pre-rest stop.
Yeah. The Lincoln Highway was far more rugged than I kind of expected. It was built in 1913, actually, through private donations, primarily from the auto industry, like, say, Goodyear Tire gave a substantial amount of money, and that helped fund sections of the Lincoln Highway. But there wasn't a lot of consistency in quality, so some sections would be paved, whereas others wouldn't. And as you got farther west, it actually became more and more dicey. Like, drivers would actually need to use railroad bridges to cross rivers and canyons because there wasn't the budget for automobile bridges in those areas. So they would have to like time it and hope that they crossed at the right time before a train would come through. And obviously probably some people doing that like got hit by a train and died. But yeah, it was like not as quote unquote luxurious as Route 66, which is funny to think about because Route 66 is not that luxurious.
Right. I remember when I was on it I guess it would have been a little over a year ago. My friends and I were on a camping trip in Arizona. I remember being like, wow, this really does feel like an old road.
Mm-hmm.
It had that kind of bumpy feeling to it.
Yeah. And it's both of them, the routes they took, they were more like circuitous because they were routed through small towns. Like modern interstates, when possible, they would just try to take the shortest routes possible between large cities. And if they happened to pass through existing towns, that might be a benefit, but it wasn't as much of a priority when they were building them. But the Lincoln Highway went from New York City to San Francisco. It was the first highway that was transcontinental. And then Route 66, it went from Chicago to Los Angeles. And the route it took was farther south because one of the biggest proponents, he was an Oklahoma native, and he really wanted Route 66 to go through Oklahoma.
So you had a little bias.
And then I feel a little embarrassed bringing this up because one of our most recent episodes was on Disney adults, but I want to bring up Cars. So have you seen it?
Oh, yeah. I babysat children in the early 2000s. I've seen it.
Yeah, I did not like that as a kid because I was not interested in cars as a kid and then also as an adult. But Pixar's animators, when they were creating Cars, they took a lot of inspiration from Route 66. And so the town that's depicted in the movie, Radiator Springs, the sort of small town energy it has and all of the small business owners that are struggling because a new highway was built nearby next to Radiator Springs and they were getting less traffic. That sort of like small town energy is what was more or less present along Route 66.
Yeah, and I think that now the nice rest stops are kind of like airy and atrium-like with really clean restrooms, right? That's kind of more our MO.
Yeah, I think we'll talk about Buc-ee's in a bit, but one thing people really like about it is the scale. They like that it's not run by a small business. It's very obviously like run by a really large corporation.
Yeah, and it's like sometimes that's a curse word, and then sometimes if it's a really comfy, air-conditioned experience, you can get away with a lot being a big corporation.
Yeah. Most Americans like that. That's what's comfortable for them. They think that like the larger a business is, the more successful, and it must be like for a reason. They intuitively tend to gravitate towards them. But yeah, there are a lot of real life places along Route 66 that are actually the inspiration for things in Cars. Like, do you remember the Cozy Cone in the movie? That's the like motel that I think her name is Flo runs.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So in the movie, the cars at her motel, they sleep in these giant traffic cones. And that was inspired by the Wigwam Motel, which was a motel along Route 66 that had like giant teepees that you could spend the night in.
Yeah, and then Radiator Springs, right? That's like the main one, the big gas station that most of the film takes place in, if I remember.
That's the name of the town that they all live in.
The town, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we stopped on the way back from this camping trip. We ended up stopping to use restrooms at a gas station that claimed to be based off of Radiator Springs, the town, or like claimed to be what they had based it off of. I'm sure there's a couple gas stations that pull that move on Route 66. It's probably not the only one, but they had like some funny like welded car sculptures, including a replica of Mater. So
Oh, I think I saw that because I found an article from like a Disney blog, the real life places along Route 66 that inspired Cars. And yeah, I've seen that picture of that mater.
it's good
Yeah.
stuff.
So that describes sort of the origins of service areas, the rest stops that are run by, that have a lot of like chains and corporations present. But rest areas, they have a bit of a different history. And again, rest areas, those are the rest stops that are state run. And those began with roadside parks. So initially, drivers, on road trips, they typically stopped to picnic because there weren't businesses to serve them food. So they would often do these at places with nice views, vistas, and then the people that managed early highways would notice these, the earliest one being in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan in 1929, and they just set up a bunch of picnic tables. So that's why there's always picnic tables. It's kind of fundamental to their purpose.
Have you stopped at those places? Can I ask this question? Have you stopped at those places on your own road trips around America, or have you spent much time at those rest areas before?
I, on my last road trip, did, which I haven't gone on many road trips, like as an adult. As a kid, I would do them all the time because my dad, that was his preferred way to go from place to place. I don't know if you've ever seen the meme that's shared on like Midwestern meme accounts about how like Midwesterners will just do like a 10-hour drive. Like, because you're centrally located, you're kind of less likely to fly intuitively for some reason.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But the last road trip I went on, it was from Chicago to Sault Ste. Marie. I was going to Canada because my ex-boyfriend at the time, he had like a family cabin there. And so I stopped at a rest area along the way and I thought it was really nice. And I was like, I honestly didn't remember stopping at one as a kid with my dad on road trips. I don't know if he just like preferred stopping at gas stations or McDonald's, but yeah, I was surprised by how it was surrounded by nature. It felt really serene. It was kind of pretty actually.
Right. And it's like sometimes they can be this really nice, serene experience. And then also sometimes at a different time of day, they can be a little spooky, But a lot of the ones that were created by the government, they have kind of like an old timey feel about them. Like you kind of feel as if you're getting a glimpse into like a 20th century vision of a road trip rather than something more contemporary.
Yeah, a lot of them need to be repaired. And the number nationally is decreasing to some degree. The most recent estimates I found were that there are 1,840 rest areas nationally, but a lot of states are preferring to allow private corporations to serve that need and let people go to Buc-ee's instead of continuing to maintain rest areas. So the number is decreasing, but there's a charm to them. I like that the government is attempting to fill that need.
Yeah, hopefully we don't get rest area funding cuts, but I'm not so hopeful right now. But
I mean, like states and then also the federal government, they do spend quite a bit on like highways and road infrastructure. But
oh yeah,
yeah,
that makes sense.
And then after the Federal Highway Act of 1956, which was passed under the Eisenhower administration, that then created the interstate highway system. So a lot of the earlier proto-highways got incorporated into the interstate system or kind of cut up and incorporated into new highways. But with that, the federal government mandated the creation of rest areas. Like there had to be a certain number. It seemed like actually a complex number of factors they had to think about, like because it was both about the distance between rest areas, also the number of drivers being served, and then also the local availability of, say, water, which isn't always that readily available, say, out west. So the spacing, they did their best, but it's not like equidistant between each rest area.
Yeah, and it can be a little bit jarring out in the West. There's that Joan Didion quote about how the West is defined by anywhere with like less than 72 inches of rain a year or some number like that. And you really feel that when you're going through these western areas after the Mississippi River where it says, no rest stop for the next 47 miles and you're looking at your gas and you're like, oh, hope we make it, because if not, we're going to be cowering under our car in this heat, this 100-degree desert heat. So
what happens if someone does get stranded on a western road trip? Like, do they call like state troopers or like who comes to assist you?
I mean, you really have to be careful. I think one thing in the West often that you're instructed is just keep water in your car, keep a blanket in your car if it's the winter, be prepared for something like that. I mean, On most of the highways, I'd imagine within 24 hours, you'll see someone. You just hope it's someone that is wanting to help you, you know?
Yeah.
I've had a few moments in these road trip journeys across America, or even just going to a national park by myself, which I like to do sometimes, where you're on a road that's truly just like a dirt ribbed road. And it's literally called like Last Chance Road in the middle of Capitol Reef National Park. And you are starting to see like tumbleweeds and chupacabras, and it's getting dark. And you're like, I really hope I make it to the highway that's supposed to be 37 miles ahead. We'll see.
Wow. And then for the next section, I want to talk about rest stop aesthetics. We can start it with sort of traditional rest stop aesthetics, which really come out of Route 66. And I think the way to describe them is really like camp or kitsch.
No, yeah, I think so. I think there's a whole scene. And I think I would even argue that some major pop stars have made a whole career of the American highway kind of camper kitsch look, like Lana Del Rey, for example.
Yeah. It gets depicted in movies, like in Cars, but also Pee-wee's Great Adventure.
Oh, totally. So you're talking a little bit more of like a trailer itself and the kind of like cute ones that are round with maybe a color, that kind of thing.
Or I'm thinking more so about like roadside attractions. Like those are depicted, I believe, in one of Pee-wee's movies, like the Cabazon dinosaurs.
No, totally. And there's some on the way. I've done the trip from east to west, both from the south and from the north, from Pennsylvania and Georgia. And there's some really wild ones in the south. Like there's like a huge Vincent Van Gogh painting in the middle of Kansas, I believe, that you can stop by and see if you pay $10.
I don't think I've ever seen any roadside attractions, even though my dad, again, he took us on road trips quite a lot. But the main point of them was to get people to stop on their way to things. It was like not meant to be art, but there's sort of an outsider art element to roadside attractions where they're meant to be visually striking or beautiful, but not technically be art. I find them interesting.
Well, there's that one in California that seems to have like really hit it off with Instagram. The Salvation Mountain in Newland, California. That's the one where it's like a painted desert hill with like a big cross, and it's painted. I can send you a picture of it, but it's like a very kitschy, I would say, extremely Pee Wee Herman core image of like a mountain painted that people can like take pictures of and come and visit or walk around.
I thought you were going to say Cadillac Ranch, which comes to mind for me because it's like a public art installation that people are encouraged to tag and spray graffiti on. Have you seen that?
I haven't, no. I've heard the term.
It's like, I believe, 10 Cadillacs where they're half buried in the ground, so obviously you can't steal them, but they've been exposed to the elements for so long, it's not like they're valuable. But yeah, people just tag them, and it looks pretty cool.
Oh, cool. Also comes to mind another contemporary art piece, the Marfa, Texas Prada.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know of this one?
I do know that one.
Yeah, which is like, they keep it restocked apparently with like current seasons.
Mm-hmm. And so I think rest stop aesthetics, they're coming from this like camp and quiche angle traditionally. And so a lot of the chains that have been around the longest, they still retain a degree of charm and detail and ornamentation that's increasingly disappearing, but is still kind of there a little bit, like say with Cracker Barrel, which we'll talk about briefly. But I think in terms of modern rest stop aesthetics, it's really a corporate minimalism. And once you enter a rest stop, you're really just hit with infrastructure. The exception is really with logos, advertising. That's where you start to see color. But overall, it's just purely like what gets the job done, what's cheap to build, and it's not very aesthetically considered.
Right. It's very much like this pragmatic American way of looking at land, and it's not really thinking about zoning usually, with some exceptions here and there with a thoughtful city planner possibly. But very much a pragmatic, almost accidental beauty to it. Yeah.
Like even the form of, say, like gas station canopies, those are kind of architecture, but they're just so functional to the point that like I just think of them as infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. I guess maybe when I'm painting them, I think of like the gas station. It's almost like this little standing forest, you know? Like this modern forest with these like vertical columns. And maybe that's part of my interest in it in a formal way, is just that it's like it's this thing that mirrors the ground. There's that ceiling of the gas station, and then these like little sticks, and then the ground itself. And so there's something about that just if you think about just shape and you think about modernism and just like these pure elements can be really interesting to look at. But like the pragmatics get in the way when we're just trying to get out the door, trying to get on the highway as fast as we can.
They're a nice horizontal form. And then what do you think about my idea that with rest stops, the aesthetic of them, it's largely just infrastructure minus what you see with like advertising and corporate branding?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is that it's pragmatic, right? That it's not about trying to please the eye usually.
Yeah.
When there is like a place that is trying to please the eye, it definitely like feels unusual in America, rather than, this European sensibility that might want to like, especially in the older centuries, want to carve out and make everything pleasing and beautiful and, Gothic or Roman.
And then in terms of like chains, there are some fast food restaurants and other chains that seem to only really exist in rest stops. Like I have to go pretty far out of Chicago to start seeing Cracker Barrel. One that I would see a lot growing up that I actually went to as a kid and like going to was Steak and Shake. I liked their fries and burgers. But are there any that you particularly like?
I mean, Steak and Shake is great. I like their little shoelace fries. That's a really nice option.
Yeah.
I don't think Auntie Anne's is singular to rest stops, but I feel like Auntie Anne's are inconsistent enough to be found in America that like when you do find them at a rest stop, it feels very exciting. And I usually have to get a pretzel with marinara.
I didn't know that you could find them outside of malls. I thought of them as being exclusively a mall brand.
There's a couple between New York and DC, which is a trip that I've taken a lot in my childhood because my parents would often go on road trips with us to New York. And there were a couple Auntie Anne's at like they call them service plazas, I think. There's one that's the Sopranos one, the James Gandolfini service area.
Oh yeah.
And then there's also randomly one in between my home in Ridgewood, New York, and my parents' house in Pennsylvania at a Walmart that kind of functioned as a travel stop because the bathrooms were very clean there, so I'd always stop there. So
one that I would see a lot growing up on road trips, but I never stopped at was Cracker Barrel. Is that one that you went to?
Yeah, my mom really liked it. My mom is a big maple syrup snob because she's from Eastern Canada, so she only liked going to Cracker Barrel. She was never a big Waffle House person because she didn't like syrup that wasn't maple. And they have little maple syrups they give you with everything you order there. We never went there for lunch. For some reason, lunch was off limits at Cracker Barrel. It didn't like hold up to her standard, but we would go there for breakfast and then go look at the intense merch that exists in the gift store outside of it.
Wait, what kind of merch do they have?
Okay, so a Cracker Barrel, I think half of the experience is the gift store. You have the restaurant itself, you get a good breakfast. There's a lot of different crap on all the walls. It's like, like vintage skis or like vintage advertising. It's very like antique mall core. And then when you walk outside of the restaurant area to get out back to your car, you go through this big giant gift shop that's kind of like I'm trying to find words to describe it. Those who have been know it has like a kind of Christmassy smell in there always, no matter what time of year it is. There's a lot of like sentimental like cards. There's a lot of like bedazzled jeans and jackets you can buy. There's a lot of like, it's got this kind of like Southern charm energy. You can buy like interesting weird toys for children there. It's kind of like the opposite of a sharper image,
Yeah.
Which I'm sure has come up on your podcast before, just like this, instead of the future, the aesthetic of it is the past, but it's almost like a caricature of itself. But there's some pretty fun things you can find in there, and often a lot of old time candy. You can buy like old vintage candy in a Cracker Barrel gift store.
I had a feeling that it might have like a gift shop or sell like home goods for some reason, but I thought that might be me mixing it up with Crate and Barrel.
Fair enough.
Yeah, but I guess maybe there are like enough billboard signs about the Cracker Barrel gift shop that like I knew that they sold merchandise like that. But yeah, I had to do some research because I'd never been in one, but they have like a Southern country themed menu. And so like some of it is served on tinfoil in order to feel kind of rustic.
Yeah, and they have like a lot of like, you can get biscuits and gravy, and you can get, like grits and different kinds of things that you wouldn't be able to find unless you're in the South a lot of the time. It's very Dolly Parton too. Like the gift store has a Dolly Parton feeling to it
Yeah,
as well. In fact, I think there's a couple of things she specifically sells through the Cracker Barrel store. I would not be surprised.
that's cool. And then we can now discuss like Cracker Barrel's attempted rebranding a little bit. On our podcast, we don't do like whatever is like a culture war issue or whatever's trending on Twitter. We're generally focused on like the history of things, and we're not trying to cover like the discourse at the moment. So this just happened to work. It kind of fits into what we're talking about today, because with Cracker Barrel, they had a like kitschy aesthetic that was meant to be old timey. The walls were covered with all of these like knickknacks, as you were saying. And then very recently, they tried to change the logo from something that had a lot of charm, character, into something that was much more minimal, which I personally didn't like. I thought that the hexagonal golden shape around the text was far too minimal for me. But what did you think about it?
You know, I was a little bit, to be very honest, I wasn't clear what the rebrand was because it was still pretty similar looking at first. But then when they added the guy back in, it was like almost like one of those Mandela effect moments where it's like, oh yeah, like he was supposed to be there the whole time. Like I realized of like some false memory or some like memory was unlocked, you know, like a feeling when you see like an old toy or something, a picture of an old toy on Instagram and you're like, oh, I used to play with that. Like it felt like a little bit of a deja vu situation. But I think that the logo looks much better with him there. It's weird how metaphorical that feels where like these companies, I don't know where they're getting their data, but they seem to think that everyone wants everything to be cleaner, more minimal. Well, all the people that I'm friends with who are interesting tend to be more like chaotic and maximal and are interested in the kind of like push against that movement. But there's something about them removing a figure that is so true about like what these companies are all doing. In some way, they're just mimicking like art history, but like 50 years late, you know?
I mean, I saw like an Instagram reel this week that had a good hypothesis for why their logo and their brand was shifting towards minimalism along with many others. Like if you think about how McDonald's have changed from being these bright, colorful places with red and yellow and play places to being places that are almost just indistinguishable from Starbucks, and how like many different chains are starting to look like each other. According to this Instagram account, Pearlmania 500, it isn't due to say like DEI, which some people were suggesting they changed their logo due to wokeness or DEI. He was suggesting it's because of Wall Street, because when a chain, if their architecture is like minimal and not distinct, it's much easier to resell it, because basically half of the reason for McDonald's to have as many stores as it does is because they're just sitting on land that's increasing in value. And so they're sort of just buying time until it can be sold off. So if the ultimate goal is to just sell off the land that the fast food chain is existing on, then it makes much more sense to build a structure that isn't as visually distinct that can then be sold and turned into anything. That was his hypothesis.
My goodness. That's a really depressing one for some reason. I think maybe because it kind of just taps into this overall arching feeling of like everything is about profits. It's all about dollar bills. I mean, I guess this is nothing new with the US, but it feels as if more and more like that's maybe one of the reasons I love malls. I love the 80s malls, because I'm sure there's a ton of, you know, mixed bag morality in the experience of like these great malls, and they probably were like climate change nightmares, but at the same time they were trying to make it a nice place for people to go with like these arboretums that were indoors. You know, they probably hired a lot of different staff to take care of their plants, and I know that the way that these employees for these stores worked, they had a lot of pride. I watched this amazing movie called The Store, where it's just a documentary of these women in Neiman Marcus in the 80s, like getting ready and excited and pepped up to sell clothing to women in Texas. And there was such a respect and honor to being a salesperson at these like department stores. And it's just so depressing that like everything is just becoming more like everyone's cutting like human employees. They're cutting the niceties of these locations. I mean, you saw that recent like Hamburglar, someone like went in and like stole one of the Ronald McDonald statues at a McDonald's because they're just getting rid of all this stuff and like kind of cleaning house, you know. And it's sad to me because it's just like I grew up in the 90s where it felt like there was this kind of Garden of Eden of trying to like make things feel more human, and it seems that now when there's anything human that stands in the way of profit, it seems like it's being cut out. I sound like an old fogey who's like on like, you darn kids, but like that's how I feel about it a little bit, you know?
Yeah. It's because private equity is squeezing everything. But there is a rest stop that hasn't been touched by private equity, and that is Garden of Eden. Do you want to talk about that?
Oh, cracking my knuckles. I can't actually do that, but spiritually. Yeah, so I'll tell you guys about a little journey I went on. I went on a trip to Idaho earlier this year in the winter. I was just in the mood to take a road trip. It was Sunday, and Sundays are pretty mellow on the road. So I took a trip actually to go get a TV from Facebook Marketplace. And this couple was like, yeah, come on, pick it up anytime. So I decided to go all the way up to, I think it was, I want to say Twin Falls, Idaho, and pick up this TV. And along the way, I hit this little town called Eden, Idaho, and I needed to get some gas and use the restroom and get a snack. And so I pulled over and went into this very quizzical rest stop. And all of a sudden I saw, like, what greeted me at the front was this almost like rainforest cafe foyer with a tree, with like a little waterfall trickling. It was kind of like humid in there. Like I thought I was going to see a parrot or something like that. And then I walk through that little threshold into the next room, and there's actually just like this big, bright, new, shiny food court with Cinnabon, with, you can buy sushi there. You can get, I think they had Subway as well. And they had like, they were kind of sticking with this Garden of Eden theme. There was a little area called Sinful Delights where you could buy some donuts. And there were some strange kind of vinyl poems about Adam and Eve and things like that on the backside of these stalls. So it was like a very big, clean corporate feeling, but you could tell that some local person had like a very distinct and idiosyncratic vision about the humor that would go throughout this whole space. So really interesting space. And, I love a gas station, so I took a lot of photos. Might end up painting something of the Garden of Eden. If you're ever going through southwestern Idaho, definitely recommend taking a look at this place because it's unlike anything else I've seen. And the little biblical undertone really adds like a really like poetic, crazy touch to this commercial space. So
there's even a like fake snake, a fake serpent with red glowing eyes.
Yeah, no, it's terrifying, but actually really cool. I mean, I'm glad that weird places like that exist,
Yeah, because they haven't been touched by private equity yet.
Precisely.
One place that is like, more unique in terms of rest stops is Buc-ee's. And I'm not going to be too critical of this. I know people in the South, Texans, are very proud of Buc-ee's. They like it. It's this amazing destination. And I think in terms of rest stops, it is unique in that it is kind of the destination for some people, where I think for like a small, but still not insignificant number of road trips, they just actually just go and travel to get to Buc-ee's. Like that's the place they want to go. But have you ever been to one?
That is the final frontier for me on gas stations. I've got to be honest with you. I've never been to a Buc-ee's, not in my living memory. They do tend to have a little bit of a cultural zeitgeist moment right now. I've noticed like some of my Gen Z students wearing Buc-ee's shirts, but all my journeys across America, I never really ended up in those like South Central states like Tennessee. I think there are a bunch of them in Texas, I want to say.
Yeah, the company is from Texas.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm jealous. I want to, it's on my gas station bucket list,
I've never been to one either. There aren't any in Illinois. The closest is somewhat close to Kansas City in Missouri. But I see tons of people now and then around Chicago wearing like Buc-ee's merchandise, or they'll have like I have a friend who in their car, they have like a little hanging Buc-ee from their like dashboard.
Oh yeah, it's like a little chipmunk or something, right? What is he, a beaver?
It's a beaver. Yeah, he's Buc-ee the beaver, which I like beavers a lot, but honestly, the mascot doesn't do it that much for me. But I feel like the mascot, it kind of adds a Disney-like quality to going to Buc-ee's in a way, because there's this charismatic mascot and all this merchandise. And then also Buc-ee's is a bit similar to like Disney theme parks in that like the employees have like a pretty strict dress code where they need to look clean cut and like wear dress shoes, and they can't show their tattoos. And a lot's asked of them, but they're also paid like a little bit more than what's standard for the industry. So they have this like upbeat attitude that again is kind of similar to Disney theme parks.
Well, it makes me maybe happy, even though people probably get a little bit maniacal about like their favorite brands, but it makes me happy that like there's still some local things that exist that people are like proud of or interested in that are paying their employees well,
Yeah. No, there's a lot of like regional culture that can be found at Buc-ee's. Like they serve like Texas barbecue, and then according to some things I read, like they'll have things that they serve that are particular to the area and other states outside of Texas. But a big thing is the bathrooms. Have you heard about them?
No, tell me more.
Their bathrooms are cleaned like 24/7. Like I think there's someone literally who's paid to clean them like nonstop. So they're really, really clean. But I think for like a lot of people on road trips, like road trip families where say the mom or dad is very stingy, the only thing that will get them to stop is like a bathroom break or getting gas. And like Buc-ee's has both of them. Like they have really large restrooms, really large gas areas with like over 100 pumps for some of them. But like they're much larger than the standard gas station. They're like over 50 times the size in some cases. Like they're almost the scale of say like a Walmart.
Well, I think that's why people often stop at a gas station is because they think that the bathroom might be clean there. You know,
Yeah.
like because we all know that that's like one of the most make or break experiences of the rest stop, in my opinion. That's why that last hour stretch before New Jersey and New York is so miserable because you know that the only gas stations you're going to have are like these little like Chevrons or Conocos that you have to ask a guy for a key on a stick to go out back and use the scary outdoor bathroom with questionable phone numbers on the walls of the bathroom.
When I think about gas station bathrooms, that is what I think about. And then something I wanted to touch on is the idea of rest stops representing sort of quote unquote flyover country and regional homogenization, because a lot of America does look relatively similar. There's like a sameness to everything. There's this book I read several years ago that was on the history of antitrust in the United States. It's really great. It's Goliath by Matt Stoller. But he has this quote in the book: "Our world looks very different than it did in the mid-1970s, and not just because of technological advances. There's a sameness to everything. In 1974, we often shopped at a local store. Today we live in a world dominated by chain stores, not just in the US, and in many cases with the sameness of experience in most major cities in the world." And I think that like rest stops do kind of represent that. I think the idea of flyover country isn't helpful in terms of people, because I think people are different depending on the region that they're in. There are differences, but I think in terms of the built environment, it is very similar from state to state.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to what you're talking about with McDonald's, how they're just rebranding all their box stores, you know. I mean, that's a chain for the record, but I went to a McDonald's in Phillipsburg, New Jersey that had like some local touches to it, where it had like some stuff about regional golfing in the area, like on little glass panels on the booths. And it had like kind of, you could tell that like the employees that worked there, the manager, owner that worked there before everything kind of got touched by the corporation and this rebrand, was still kind of locally interested, you know,
Yeah.
and that's something that's just like disappearing before our eyes, even in the chain level, but especially on the local level, unless you can really stand out like Buc-ee's has done.
Do you know the Twitter account Non-Standard McDonald's?
Yes, big fan.
Yeah. There's actually a documentary that came out within the last year that Evan Collins was featured in on YouTube. But yeah, McDonald's, I think, because it can be franchised, there is a little bit more opportunity for there to be variation in the form and aesthetic of McDonald's than, say, other fast food brands. Like Chick-fil-A is not franchised. I believe it's owned by just one family. So there's not going to be much variation there.
Yeah, that would make sense.
But in terms of regional homogenization and that being represented very well through the aesthetic form of rest stops, I think of the European mind can't comprehend this meme. We can finally talk about that.
We finally arrived at our destination, Breezewood, Pennsylvania.
So the photograph that was taken by, what was his name again? Edward
Bertinsky. Yeah, he's does a lot of photos of commercial spaces like grocery stores and parking lots and things like that.
Yeah. His photograph of Breezewood, Pennsylvania apparently was part of a series that he did on oil, but the town he depicted, Breezewood, many comments wherever this photo gets posted online will say like, oh, this could be anywhere. It could be near me. Or some comments will also specify that it is Breezewood, Pennsylvania. But rest stops, when they're removed and you don't know the location, like you really could guess that they're anywhere most of the time. like across states, like they kind of all look the same.
I mean, I have been to that Breezewood, Pennsylvania stop, and it is uniquely maximalist. But yes, you're right. It's like kind of embodies, it's almost like a composite image of every rest stop.
No, it does look maximalist. That's partly because, do you want to talk about how the photograph was taken?
Right. So Edward Bertinsky, he took a razor ladder and went up above and had him and his assistants taking photos of the space. I only know the assistants part because that's my mentor right now and my current job, and also my coworker, Daniel Everett. He worked for him for a few years and helped him take those photos. But they would go up very high on these ladders and take photographs to get this kind of uncanny like bird's eye view, you know?
No, that's a good phrase, God's eye view, because he was 80 feet off of the ground, which felt sort of like supernatural.
Right. And I think when you're driving through those spaces, you're driving through them in motion. And so you're kind of taking it all in this immersive place. But a photo is so much more difficult to capture the intense rest stop experience that is experienced at Breezewood. I ate a cheeseburger from the Sheets there in the spring of last year, and it honestly did the job.
Yeah. Another reason, though, that the photograph looks so maximalist is because Breezewood, Pennsylvania, it is where an interstate highway and a toll road meet, the Pennsylvania Turnpike. And so according to like interstate highway law, you can't have it where like a free interstate highway connects directly to a toll road, because then people would just like automatically get charged and get angry. So Breezewood, Pennsylvania is kind of a big loophole where like, because the interstate highway terminates in Breezewood, then people can kind of drive around and then get onto the toll road if they so choose. And so in the middle of Breezewood, Pennsylvania, you see above the street highway signage. And that's like part of what's making it so maximal. It's like, it is like literally the highway right next to all of these gas stations and fast food drive-thrus.
Yeah, and I think the first time I saw it and realized it was the place from the meme was on a trip in the winter from the west back to eastern Pennsylvania. And I remember seeing it from the highway, and it kind of has this like aura to it, maybe because of the meme. But from far away, you can already kind of tell it's like a unique kind of, depending on who you're asking, either commercial heaven or dystopian hell, you know?
It has a much older history than I realized, though. Like, I assumed, as I already mentioned, that like rest stops all more or less probably sprung up after the 50s, but Breezewood actually, the original Lincoln Highway was routed through it in 1913. So it's been serving motorists for over 100 years. And in pictures of it, you know, more so in pictures that exist of Breezewood from the early 2000s, there are like more small businesses than you'd kind of expect. It has a little bit more charm than, say, average.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think sometimes those older rest areas, they can actually like, because our world is changing because of these private equity companies, or there's so much rebranding going on. Sometimes it's funny how nostalgia can start to set in on things that we once thought were just crass and present, you know?
Yeah. And then on last week's episode, Infrastructure Aesthetics, Joseph jokingly asked, what is a turnpike? And I learned what it is for this week. So it's basically just a toll road or a highway that collects tolls. And it's a term that's primarily used on the East Coast, I believe, right?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I think I've been misusing all the different I've been thinking of them as interchangeable terms, but they probably do have very specific meanings for federal and state funding.
Yeah, I learned so much about highways this week, more than I ever knew before.
They're, as David Byrne says in his movie True Stories, which is about a mall in Texas, he says, some people say these are the cathedrals of their time. I don't know if I believe that.
I mean, I feel like Buc-ee's for some people might be getting there, but otherwise, no.
Mm.
But something I just want to mention is that, you know, I'm a bit of an urbanist, and urbanists don't like car-oriented places. But when I am in a rest stop or in a rest area, I try to enjoy it because there are no alternatives. Actually, Breezewood, Pennsylvania, you can walk around in because it's not a controlled access highway. There's a video of an urbanist YouTuber, Classy Whale, actually walking around in it because it kind of has a sidewalk, which is surprising. But like if I'm on a road trip and the person driving me around, it stops in one of these places, I might as well just appreciate what I can about it. Like, I do find them interesting, and I do enjoy, say, like fast food like anyone else.
What's not to love about, you know, some salt and sugar. No, I know. I feel the same way. Like, I think that I have this rule that anything I paint, I really want to paint things that I only find beautiful.
Yeah.
We often think of beauty and beautiful as just such a vague and difficult to pin down word, but I know it in my heart and gut when I feel it. And I actually do find these places unironically and ironically, and a secret third thing, beautiful. You know, that they
Yeah.
have this kind of power, because it is significant to live in a time when you can at any moment find some spicy Cheetos, you know? Like, that's pretty incredible. It's like a pilgrim or a medieval man can't comprehend this, you know? Europeans are starting to comprehend this because they've seen the meme enough that they're starting to understand where we're coming from, I think. But there's something kind of miraculous, for lack of a better word, about like these spaces, although of course, like anything else, they're compromised.
Yeah. No, I don't think enough artists, well, I shouldn't be too broad with this, but I don't think enough artists try to make beauty the goal with their art. I, as an artist, I'm not practicing at the moment. The only creative thing I have is this podcast, but I appreciate beauty a lot too. And I appreciate it in your work as well.
Thank you. Well, you know, like I said, it's hard to define. I think I'm someone who really enjoys a lot of music, because music often feels like it's devotional and it's of the heart.
Yeah.
Even when it is like kind of punk, you know, there's something about it that's about this kind of human heart thing. Painting sometimes feels like a little bit of a more of an intellectual and philosophical pursuit, at least historically in the last 100 years or so. But I kind of am interested in bending it back towards devotion in some way, or at least like the things that I love are the things that I want to paint. But I hope to bring out something that feels like it lets other people into the situation. It also allows nuance and a range of interpretation.
Are you using the word devotional at all in a religious sense? Because there's also a section on your website with religious subject matter.
I mean, I am religious, and it's something that informs my life and it makes my life richer. But I grew up in a family that's all over the map. So I think that it's always been important to like tap into something where it feels like other people can see and enjoy the work. But for me, yeah, it just definitely comes from this place of faith or hope or like pursuit of like a higher state of being, which is, I think everyone's trying to get to that in their own way, you know?
Yeah. Because my personal definition of beauty that I like the most is that it's a sign from God that something is good.
I love that. That's beautiful. Yeah. So you're a believer as well, it sounds like.
Yeah, I am.
That's great. I mean, it's something that's personal, right? But it's also like this kind of universal thing that connects us all together through our different perspectives.
Yeah.
Not to sound too, I believe the children are our future, kumbaya, but also at the same time, you know?
Yeah. And then there's one other thing with rest stops I want to mention. It's the Illinois Tollway Oasis. Have you ever heard of these before?
What is it called? Sorry, one more time.
They are Illinois Tollway Oases.
I don't think I've run into those, but I have run into the Illinois tolls.
Yeah. So these are sort of unique, at least within the United States, because the only other state that has something similar to this is Oklahoma. But these are bridges that span over highways that are enclosed pedestrianized food courts. They have like nice views over the highway, and you can go and stop there to use the bathroom and then get some food. And there were at 1.7 in Illinois, now only 4 exist as of 2025. I learned actually they're not as unique as I thought, because they're called like bridge restaurants outside of the United States. But yeah, I like them because they're using space in the air that otherwise wouldn't be used. And I think they probably on paper are more efficient than, say, like in terms of land use than the average rest area. But they actually aren't that profitable, because like 3 of them closed, in part because they weren't doing as well, but also because they were widening the highways. They had to add extra lanes, which then required them to tear down these like bridges.
That's so fascinating. Like, so are they above the highway? That's what I'm picturing.
Yes.
I mean, like, that's like to me the most modern thing I can think of, right? Like that kind of like building space above travel space. Like that's a very like insane thing. Whenever I'm in New York and I'm going under the East River and I'm like, I can't believe I have phone service right now. Like those moments when things are vertically stacked. That's like, to me, those moments where my mind kind of is blown by modernity and like our accomplishments, you know?
Yeah.
And engineering wise. I mean, not my accomplishments, but some construction worker and an engineer.
The Tollway Oases, they're older though than like they look, because they were rebuilt in the 2000s, but they originally opened in 1959. So they've been around for a while.
Okay, yeah. I am really curious to look more into those.
Yeah. But that kind of like leads us towards the end. So before we wrap up, do you have any things that you want to promote? Shows, any projects you're doing? Where can we follow you on the internet?
Yeah, so my Instagram is just my name. It's at Madeline Rupard. You also heard about my mall Instagram, which is currently, I like to say dormant, but not a dead volcano. You know, you might get some new explosion of mall content soon. My friend Ann Hart and I both run that account, and we like to post any new scans. Actually, often I'll use Evan Collins scans from his Tumblr because they're really beautiful and he finds really great stuff. Sometimes we'll order our own catalogs and scan them in as well. Outside of that, I mean, I actively exhibiting artist. I worked on a book called Passages, which is kind of about driving your car around the country. We just produced a second edition of this book, and it's basically my paintings and then some of my words accompanied with my paintings that are just kind of about where your mind goes when you're driving. And it's very kind of minimal in the text and conversational. I always say I wanted to be a filmmaker, but I hate group projects. So I make paintings and I write and put those things together. And they're like these little short films that exist in a book form. That's how I think of them, at least. And you can buy a copy of it if you're interested on slowwormpress.com. Yeah, that second edition is available now. But yeah, I'm really just a big fan of the kind of bewildering and beautiful place that is this country with all of its problems and challenges and achievements and dramas. You know, there's a lot there, and I think that it's something I can endlessly chew on and paint about. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you for coming on. This episode, it was a perfect companion for what we did last week. So thank you again for doing it.
Oh yeah, it was such a pleasure. Thank you so much. And I'm so a fan of Silent Generation. I think this kind of work is so special, and especially now when people tend to listen to things more than they read, I think you're doing something actually quite unique.
Thank you. Okay. Bye, everyone.
All right. Bye.